Alright, we're live.
This is it?
Live in the tiny house.
Live in the tiny house. Super nice to be here in person with you, Torben.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we were just talking about life as a therapist. And you were sharing also about what's been going on in your life as well.
Yeah, you were you were sharing something which I love, which is like you were saying that you were moving more into like spiritual therapy, like more of a free form kind of therapy. Could you talk a little bit about like what's the difference between the two? Like what is one and what is the other?
Well, there is not one without the other. But what I was sharing, what I kind of see myself kind of moving into right now in the therapy that I do is just it's a little bit more dynamic or intuitive. So I think in a lot of psychotherapy, you get educated, you get trained in a certain type of model. So for example, the thing that I love using or working with is acceptance and commitment therapy. And in that model, there's a whole kind of way of working with different things that people bring into therapy. And what I was sharing with you is that like I still want to use some of that stuff, but not get so caught up in the agenda, or caught up in like we have to do a certain thing in a certain session, because what often happens is that somebody will bring in something completely different, and then you're just like, whoa, like I had this in mind, but if I get too caught up in that, then it becomes something that's not intuitive. And so what I was saying is that like right now I'm just kind of in this kind of whole phase, I guess, or this whole kind of this whole pathway of using the things I've learned from meditation, from therapy, from different models, and also just being really intuitive to that person and what that person's energy, what they're bringing into that session in that moment, and really honoring that energy or the spiritual kind of presence between them and I, and what's kind of coming to me as something.
I want to say I feel like saying honoring the moment, right?
Yeah.
Like honoring. That's what I think is so important. I think that's the highest therapy. I think that's why sometimes you go to someone and you talk to them and afterwards you feel better and they're not even a therapist.
Yeah.
And of course, yeah, because they honor the moment and they go where the moment takes them, right?
Yeah.
And of course, if you are a therapist, then you have a lot of you have more tools that you can be more creative, because like it's like a really creative person can't really play a guitar solo without learning the guitar first, right?
Yeah.
But a person who is too schooled doesn't have the freedom to play something that's truly beautiful, something that truly honors the moment. So there's in Zen they had this thing where they would learn in Zen painting, they would learn to paint for 6 years, and then they would be forbidden to paint for another 6 years. And then when the 12 years has passed, they would have learned painting, but then they would have forgotten their schooling again.
Yeah.
And then they could paint freely with everything they knew, but without being obstructed by what they what they knew.
Yeah. And that's this balance in the therapy room, in the therapy space, to not hold so tightly to the things that I've learned, but just to loosen and give the creative freedom.
It makes me so happy. Like when I first heard you, like you've been kind of approaching this for a while now, like because there's always been the desire in you to experiment with more freedom, and that's how you are as a person also. But
I feel
earlier you've always been wanting to, and I've just been like dreaming of the day where you were like, okay, just like you just throw yourself into the deep end and see what happens. So I'm so happy because the magic the magic that comes when you are willing to throw everything out and just honor the moment. You can't beat that. Like you can't beat that. And then whatever you do is you perfectly thread the needle of whatever is in the room at that time with the person and with you. Like it's perfect because you take what they bring you and you make something out of it, right? Instead of your schooling telling you, oh, I should push this in, or I should use this, or we should stick to this. That part of your mind, which is really afraid, actually, when it comes down to it, it's a kind of fear.
Yeah.
You let that go, and then you weave a tapestry of therapy out of the moment. Of whatever the moment brings, you weave it together. And in the moment, it may look like this, there's no pattern, it's just chaotic, it looks crazy. And even in that session, it may look that way. But after a few sessions, after some time, the pattern starts to emerge and you're like, wow, we have weaved a perfect pattern here. But all we needed was we had to trust it at the moment, even though we couldn't see the whole picture.
See the whole canvas of...
And you can't learn that in school.
No, and I think that's actually how I learn best, actually, is through the direct experience, or through, like, I think they call it kinetic learning, when you're actually in the space with your person, maybe with your hands or with your voice or whatever's like kind of happening, but you're the one actually moving into that, and that's just so different from a book or a training to some degree. Because you never know what that person's going to bring in, and if you're too stuck, well, what I've experienced, if I'm too stuck in the agenda, then I kind of lose the essence or the what's behind what the person's saying. What's the emotion that's kind of like, because most times in therapy it's a very subtle. There's a lot of observing, because there's a subtleness in somebody's emotion. There's some kind of there's a lot to pick up on, I guess you could say, and so
even more than that.
What do you mean?
If you try to pick up on it, you're already a step behind, right? You really have to let it sink in, like intuitively, right?
Yeah. Like, and this is all coming about mainly based in this kind of this transitional stage I'm in right now, right? And this transitional kind of flow in the therapy that I'm doing it's taking shape. So I don't know what it's actually gonna be, right? But it's taking shape in that when I reflect on, like, okay, what, as a therapist, like what is my role, and even if you take the word like psychotherapy, what does that mean? Like if you break up the words, like it means like psyche or soul and healer. And I think I just love that kind of, I really see that in the work that I do. Is like it's a healing process. We were talking about that off camera.
Yeah.
It's like, are you ever truly healed? as much as we want to be healed from the pain and the suffering and the chaos or the emotion that we're kind of trapped in or that we react from. And I would say, it's a like we were saying, also it's a process. It's a continuum. Like, and that process gets more and more refined as you go through that. And I think the beautiful thing in therapy is that the client can take different things that we do and continue with that out of therapy. So when they want to end, they can still use those things to keep that work on themselves, to keep refining the healing process. And so I've been really exploring what is healing.
Yeah.
What is it from, and what is trauma? What is kind of what are these emotions that are stuck in us, these blockages, and like how do we work with that in a very intuitive way, in a way that is safe for that person to enter? Because if you try and enter too quickly, like sometimes I get very enthusiastic, right? And at the same time, if that person is not ready, it can go the opposite way, right? So it's all about giving space, giving time, and giving the safety for that person's the different parts of them to kind of let go of the protectors and allow themselves, their nervous system, to do what it wants to do, which is to heal, to process the emotions, to sit with the emotions, and that whole thing can be for most of us, it can be terrifying, and it can be a lot to hold that space alone. And so that's what I'm also discovering is like the power in therapy, that you're guided in this with somebody else who can hold that space, and you can move through that together, and that you're not alone in that, which can be for most of us, it can mean the world, right? To work through those things that maybe it's kind of like this. I often experience this as like sometimes I feel heavy around certain things. Sometimes
that's a good expression.
I feel an emotion, and I react in my body. I get like fueled by it. There's this kind of like, I don't know, there's something wanting to just explode inside, right? And sometimes I'm like, wow, where does that come from, right? And most often those are kind of like these emotional blockages, or these kind of, someone can call it trauma if you want to call it trauma for the sake of it, right? But it's something that is stuck in us, that is kind of like all of a sudden it comes out in a way where we don't expect it, right? And maybe we do at some points, right? And so I think that's the work on self to be done, is like to go deeply into those things, like what is that emotion? Where does it come from? And can we process? Can we allow that to be there, so that we can kind of be tuned into ourself, our authentic self, and live from that place, whilst kind of allowing those other parts to be there. And what's your kind of reflection on that, Caravan?
Yeah. Sounds about right.
Yeah.
I think sometimes that the moment you get enough love, you let go.
That's an interesting comment. What can you tell me more? Because that's something that I've been kind of like sitting with recently as well. And if that's okay to say, that kind of like that I'm giving love to that other person that I don't really know, but and that can give space to let go. Like, tell me more about that, Tobin.
I think all good therapy is really a form of energy healing, and that's a form of love, really. And I think that's another reason why you have to be careful with methods, because it was hard for me to understand how not doing anything could, get everything done when it came to this stuff. But if you come in with a method, are you really honoring the other person? If you're really honoring the other person, then you start with the person and then you see where that goes, right? And then you're sitting listening to someone, you're honoring that person, you're healing their energy, and you're giving them love, because love is attention, right? That's why we see in children, even if children can't get the love of their parents, they'll try to get the hate of their parents, because as long as they get attention, that's proof of life, it's proof of existence, right? If you're paying attention to me, then I exist. Good or bad, you're still paying attention to me, right? So I think all attention is love. And and I think the primary thing is you're being there with that person, and you're honoring the person, and all the other stuff, sometimes it's important, sometimes it's not important, but every time you sit with a person, you're filling up you're saturating their love energy. And when it reaches a certain point, whatever fragmented personality that's giving trouble, when you have enough love, then it opens up and then it releases, because now it feels safe. It was lack of safety that created the personality fragment to begin with, the coping mechanism or whatever it was. And give it enough love and warmth, and then it releases again, and the person is free. And so there are all kinds of other stuff, but I think the honoring the moment and honoring the person is most important, because that's, if you want to do something or get somewhere, are you really loving the other person? Not really, even if someone says, well, I just want to help. Yeah, but why do you want to help, right? But if you get right down to it, it's always selfish. It's like, sometimes when I'm with someone, I'm like, oh, I would love to resolve this part of them. But that's not love. That's my selfishness, right? And of course, it's not like it's not this huge, terrible selfishness like wanting to hurt someone or steal from them. But it's still, I'm still being dazzled by my own ideas, right? I'm not honoring the moment, I'm not honoring the other person and seeing if I'm the space for this, what will naturally arise, right? And sometimes nothing arises, and that's where you and we have these moments of silence, right? Because there's nothing arises, but even in that silence, and I hope that the people who listen can feel that even in that silence there is energy and there is healing. And sometimes in the silence is the most healing is in the silence,
No words.
So I think the therapist is an energy healer, first and foremost. And that's why it's so important to leave a space for the spontaneous and that which arises out of the moment. And that's why I think most therapists that I like are a little weird, because I know people who are a little weird, they're more willing to see, what happens and go with that.
Yeah. And what I will say is, like, most therapists have gone through their fair share of suffering.
Yeah.
In different forms. Why else would they want to become a therapist? Why else would they want to hold so many people in that space? And a part of this new form of therapy that's taking shape is also honouring that which I have suffered and giving that space, because oftentimes when somebody is going through different things, it does invoke.
The client is almost always a reflection of ourselves, which is also very interesting.
Yeah, and so what I'm noticing in that as well is if I'm not doing my own work and self, and if I'm guarding something, then it's very challenging for the other person to be space for the other person to kind of go into whatever that is. So more recently, I've just been really opening up in the sense of allowing myself to go deep, so that the other person can also go deeper into that emotion or into that whatever that is. And I think that's a really big part of, well, I feel that's a really big part of the healing piece in the therapy space and in that journey for the person as well. And it's honestly pretty fascinating, this whole journey, right? Because in a way, like, when I started, I thought, wow, I'm a therapist now. I've got to have it all together.
Yeah.
And I've got to have my shit together, right? And then I realized, wow, I don't really have my shit together. And do we ever have all that shit together, right? Like, and here I am saying this, I'm like, wow, that's open for an attack. Like, that's pretty, I'm feeling like, whoa, that's not safe to say that.
Yeah, because it used to be that you had to be an authority, right?
Yeah, it's something like this. And then I'm like, you know what? That's not human.
That's not really how either of us want to show up, right?
Yeah, and it's not authentic to the deepness, to the authenticity in that space, and not authentic to the other person as well. So I'm just kind of like on this in this phase right now of just like, just being a little bit more human, being more real,
putting down the armor.
Yeah, like taking the shield away, and kind of like, as you were talking about this of what real therapy is, or this kind of like thing of honoring the self and all this stuff, I'm just wondering, like, for the person listening, what does that look like? If you want to do that more in your life, like, what does that look like if you're honoring yourself more, you're honoring the moment more, the presence with that person, or the emotion as well in between them and I.
I'm reminded by a simple sentiment that a lot of people have phrased in different ways, but it goes something like, most people don't listen to hear, they listen to speak. And they're thinking about the next thing to say. And even right now, as we're talking, I have to watch my mind being like, oh, I can say this, I can go there, I can go that. And I just have to leave that be and try to just be here with you in this moment.
Yeah.
That's a challenge because the mind is like, the mind is a tool and the tool wants to be used, right? It's difficult to put it down. So I think, what is one way we can honor people more? You're talking about, well, can we, at least sometimes in a conversation, can we practice listening to hear and not listening to speak, and not even listen to understand, because some people are trying to understand, and there are these techniques people may have learned to seem interested in all that stuff, but not even that. Don't listen to understand, because that's still a little bit too much activity. Can you just be there and then, soak up what's coming, absorb what's coming without even trying? It's the sound will reach your ears. You don't have to think about it. Can you honor the space of,
And it's fascinating because when you do that, something comes, like something's like kind of channeled, or there's like there's a space for the spirit to kind of fill up between us and kind of for that energy to be there, right? Can I offer something else as well here? And this is something like I often find myself being scared in this space. Not so much sometimes in the therapy room, but most often just in daily life, right? With my partner and with family, with sometimes with friends, or with just like and that's this of when there's an uncomfortable emotion that arises, or any emotion, so to speak, but most often an uncomfortable emotion, to give space for that through acknowledging it or through talking about it. Like there's one thing to sit with it, but there's another thing to also just kind of say like what do I feel right now, and maybe vocalize that, and so for example with my partner, or with my wife, then sometimes like I will say like, I feel really sad right now. I'm not sure exactly why, but I just feel like I could cry or something, or I feel really a lot of anger or frustration or something. And funny enough, and this is how a lot of people respond to that. And I don't know if I should say this on this, but whatever. Like it's how a lot of people do this, and they're like, "Oh, you shouldn't feel that way.
Oh, yeah.
You shouldn't feel sad. You shouldn't feel frustrated about this. It's not worth feeling frustrated about, or whatever.
Yeah.
Oh, it's okay. Don't feel that way."
Yeah.
And I just, and I'm like, sometimes I'm like, well, is that really holding space for that emotion?
Yeah.
It's like, and so, most likely you might encounter that, right? When practicing this, especially if you just start out just randomly saying, like, I feel this way. I notice this feeling of sadness. Or I notice this feeling of anger. But either way, it's a way of beginning to regulate yourself, beginning to open up to that emotion and give some space for it, and just and let it kind of.
Yeah, because we have to remember that our actions tell our story to ourselves. So some people are saying, well, I don't feel bad about my emotions, I'm not ashamed of my emotions, whatever. But then think about the truth of that. If that was true, would you really be unwilling to talk about them? If you're really truly okay with your emotions, you would be okay with telling what you feel to everyone, right? Because you wouldn't feel ashamed of it or whatever.
Yeah. But how often do you go up to somebody and say, like, I feel shame, I feel anger, like I notice I feel this.
I do it often because that's how we teach ourselves that it's okay to have those emotions.
Yeah. Because
every time we don't, we tell ourselves that this part of us is shameful.
Yeah.
And it might be that we live in a culture where it is shameful and so on, but it's we have, the way we heal ourselves in this point is we simply have to, in whatever way we find safe or whatever steps we want to take, we have to start talking about the things that are are happening inside us, because that's what makes them feel less forbidden and personal, and that's what loosens it up.
Yeah.
That's what loosens up the whole. And so many, we talk about these personality fragments that are making noise and talking in our heads and creating emotions, whatever. So many of those, the way I resolve them, like I don't necessarily work a lot with them directly, but what I do is I tell my friends about it. Whenever there's something that needs space, then I talk to a friend about it. And it's always shameful, and I'm always scared when I'm doing it. That's also how I know that it's going to resolve something by doing it.
Yeah,
because it wouldn't be stuck in me. There wouldn't be a fragment if it wasn't something that hadn't been seen, and there hadn't been a space for it. So I seek people who can help me hold that space for it.
Yeah.
And and maybe not everyone has someone like that in their lives right now, but if you start trying to hold space for them yourself, and you try to open up a little bit here and there, over the years, eventually you'll end up in a life where you do have people around you, where you can speak freely about everything you feel, or most of it at least. That's how I feel these days. I have many friends where I can just bare my soul, and the result of that is that I don't have to go around, fighting all these things inside anymore, because there are people who are willing to hold space for it. There are even people who are willing to hold space for it, even if they find it difficult.
Yeah.
And that's
the role of the therapist, right? Like
that's the role of the therapist, and
the role of and other people play that part as well.
And if you don't have any friends like that, and you probably don't, because if you're not comfortable with your emotions, then it's unlikely that your circle of friends are. So that's where you go to the therapist, right? And then over time, one day you find yourself surrounded by other people who are free and open and vulnerable, and then you're in a very different life situation. Then you're a little bit closer to heaven,
Yeah.
But you are.
Yeah. To love and connection, and that's what I was going to say. Like as you share this now, I can't help imagine some people listening into this and thinking, like, why would I do that? Because I'm also like that. For me, like that's danger. That's like that's a death threat. And
sure.
So at least for a part, like we talked about fragments of personality, for parts of myself, like that's just like too much, and that's like something bad's gonna happen if I do that. If I open up to that emotion, I might, and there's whole deep work with that, with going into that kind of stuff. But at least just to notice when that part of you is trying to protect you. Like if it's trying to protect you, it's doing its job really well, right? And just to kind of know that on the other side of this, like why we do this, why do we share these emotions that are uncomfortable? And at least what I reflect personally and with clients as well is like, it's about looking at what's on the other side of that. Looking at like, okay, if I'm willing to do this, if I'm willing to hold space for my emotion, especially the uncomfortable, the shame, the stuff that doesn't get talked about, doesn't get held, doesn't get carried or have space for, then when I do go into that, when I am willing to kind of show up and be with those emotions, what's on the other side of that is healing, is connection, is just being free to be who you are inside. It's all these things that are kind of like it gives space for your everything to flow again. And I mean, a clear example of that is like in a relationship, right? I'll use my relationship in this context. Like I'm a really sensitive person, and I see that as like a great gift as a therapist. And at the same time, like I just pick up so much of what's going on around me. So you can imagine that when you're in a relationship and there's emotion that's not getting talked about, but is in that space, and is kind of
overwhelming.
Yeah, it's just like it's a lot to be in, right? And so whether that's me or whether that's the other person, either way, when I either like let my guard down and just give love and give like this space to kind of for them to kind of share what they're feeling, or the other way around. Like, I mean, it goes from like her feeling so disconnected and distant from me to feeling, you know, loved and held and cared for and connected again. And I mean, that just means so much in a relationship. And I remember like when we first started going out, like that space would be when there would be those emotions, that especially of like anger and of shame and things like this. They could be hours, days, weeks that emotion would be in between us.
Oh, that's a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot, right? And now it's like, what I notice is that time gets shorter and shorter because of how we are in that, and because of how I am showing up in that, and the way I'm regulating myself to then go back into it and to kind of open myself to that emotion and give space for that to be there. So but you can also ask yourself, like, why would this be important to me to do this work? If I'm going to be willing to go into these uncomfortable feelings and emotions and do this healing work and work on myself.
I want to say something about that.
Yeah.
Because why is it important? Because I always used to believe this, but now I know it to be true. And it is that most people feel that something is missing in their lives. As you become more spiritually evolved, that feeling will go away for a time. So sometimes it may even disappear completely. But if right now there is anything that you feel is missing in your life, and you might say, well, of course everyone feels something's missing, but it's not necessarily true. If you feel something is missing in your life, then there is something inside you that is pushing that away. Like, whatever it is you feel is missing, you are actually withholding that from yourself and from the world. There is something in you that is actively blocking this thing from coming to you and from coming out of you. So if there is any dullness or boredom or some kind of absence, something is missing in your life, that is actually something that you are holding back, because there are certain emotions whose job it was for many years ago to protect you against a certain thing. But this thing that you're now protected from, that's the very thing that you're missing in your life. For example, what happened to me and what happened to a lot of people is you have a turbulent childhood and you learn to be an adult too early, and you become sort of serious. And that makes you a more responsible person, and there are positive things in that, but you also find that you're missing the playfulness, you're missing the joy of life, you're missing the looseness, you're missing life itself. And until you allow that personality fragment or coping mechanism, which has created this overly serious person, until you allow that to be dismantled, you will be missing this feeling of life. It will not come, it cannot come in, because you are holding it away through this mechanism. This egoic mechanism is specifically holding away this kind of emotion, because you experienced at one point in your life that this emotion was forbidden. Someone didn't like that emotion. So why should I expose myself to things that are the most uncomfortable? Like you said earlier, it's like death, it's like danger. A lot of these things are like psychological death. Well, that's because what that fear is holding away is actually a part of life. And whoever you are, wherever you have that, if you look at life as a circle and then we slice it into different pieces, Every person has blocked out some of this circle with these mechanisms, and that slice of the pie of life is then what is felt to be missing in that person. And it can be like, with me, it can be like the joy and the spontaneousness and the freedom of not being serious, of childishness. But there are also people who are stuck in childishness, who want to feel, who lack the feeling of responsibility, who lack the feeling of being an adult in all the good ways, because they have protected themselves against the seriousness of life and against responsibility, because they were told at some point that they couldn't take responsibility, or they were shown that responsibility was too much. So they may retract into a childish mechanism in which they remain childish forever. And every mechanism has blind spots, so it creates continuous problems in daily life. Someone who is too childish has problem with responsibility. Someone who is too responsible has problem with enjoying life. Wherever in yourself there is a blockage, there is a part of life that you're not experiencing, and it's the very part of life that you will feel that you're missing. And it will create attractions in your life that are unhealthy. For example, an overly serious person may get attracted to an overly childish person. And you might say, well, that's good, then they balance each other out. They don't really balance each other out. They're just two extremes that give each other the other extreme, but they never really learn to have it themselves. And an extreme person is always incapable of living in a good way. So two extreme people do not function well together, and they're actually two people who function not very well, which are then added on top of each other. There is no way to compensate for these enriching life experiences, the nectar of life, the flow of life, the very thing that you want so badly to feel that you may even have convinced yourself that that's just not going to happen, or it doesn't exist, or it's gone. It does exist. It is whatever part of life that you are withholding you're holding yourself away from. So danger or death or whatever it is you'll face in that cave of uncertainty, life is at the end of that journey. The treasure is life, feeling alive. And that's certainly worth going for. And for many people, for myself, it is, you do have to go through the feeling of death, because that's the original experience where you were shown that this part of you was forbidden. That's the time where you were afraid of dying, and so you stopped doing it, and you taught yourself, I can never do this again. So that's why I think being uncomfortable can be crucial. That's where you get life. Don't make yourself uncomfortable just to be uncomfortable. Don't fall into self-punishment. That's not a good look either. But do go towards whatever it is that is what seems to be missing in your life, but seems to be difficult and uncomfortable. Go towards that.
For some, it's what we tend to avoid.
Exactly.
What we tend to kind of be scared of.
And often what we've told ourselves is stupid or wrong or not necessary, or
so we've got these rules.
We have a reason. Yeah.
It's a wrong way of behaving, or it's a wrong way of feeling.
And we'll often some people will seek out other people who have the same opinion, and they'll sort of like, we have these they're like, people are not serious these days, and, money, and, gotta look at the stock market. And so they kind of, and then they look at the out group, and they're like, oh, look at these silly people, whatever. But those people who are really resisting that, they're really missing that part. They're missing the child. And this can be, and it's okay, this is a process that can take many years. So it's okay that wherever you are in this process, it's okay, because you might be at the start of the process where you're only just realizing that there are some things in your life you're really against. You're really against this thing. You're not really sure why, but this particular thing, you don't like it. And over a 5-year period, you may go from feeling like that to finding out that this is something that you actually want to open up to and you want it to have more of it in your life. But right now you may be where you find this to be the most horrible thing in the world. And you're just starting to scratch at that wall and just a little bit curious about, I wonder why I feel so strongly about this. And it may be a long psychological path before you come to the conclusion that this is something you want to let go of and it's actually inhibiting you. So it's okay wherever you are in this path. It can be a long path because you might have held these beliefs for 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 years. Wherever you are, it could be good to realize that a really healthy person isn't really against anything, not particularly. I mean, of course, they'll stay away from bad things and they won't do evil things and so on. But a healthy person is not really on a crusade against anything. Not really. They don't really hate anything.
Coming back to the love.
Yeah. So whatever it is you hate, if you're just over a few weeks or a few months or whatever, maybe look at why do you hate this? Why are you afraid of it? What's going on here?
And also perhaps notice this battle may be playing out in your own mind, in your own self, within your own emotions. And what would it look like if you were to give love to that part? Instead of being in the battle, like what would it look like if you were to welcome that party and give it a hug or give it some compassion or some love and honor that as a part of you, as a part of something inside you trying to protect you or trying to manage something or trying to help you in some way. Because often it is. And
it always has a logic, right?
Yeah.
It's there for a reason.
And that's what I notice in every behavior, everything that we kind of do, or everything that happens from us, it has some kind of function, and usually it's a good thing in some way. Something in it is good. And that's like I think that's a really key thing to kind of get to know what is that in what you're doing.
And it almost always is just simply that you did something that your parent did not like. And then you learn that we can't do this again because that makes the parent upset. And children, even though children may be small and we consider them kind of naive and stuff, children know deep down that they will die without their parents. They know they are completely dependent on them. They know this. So if the child finds a part of themselves that the parent does not like, the child has to try and kill that part of themselves somehow. Because they know the alternative could be danger or even death.
Or abandonment.
Now, some children might have stronger temperaments, or it may happen later in life, but they are more willing to fight back. But most of these things is simply, it's simply a child trying to not get abandoned. And it may not even have been a big deal for the parent, but the child doesn't know that. The parent may just have lost their mind once. It may not even have been an issue for the parent. Maybe the parent was tired and sleep deprived and this random thing set them off. So some of these things are not even, they don't even make sense to the parent. There is a sense of these things is, as you get older, these things just kind of happen. They're not as... It can be okay for a while to blame people and to feel judgment towards the people who made you feel in a certain way. And that's okay too, that's a process. But with time you realize that no one really does anything on purpose. No one is really mean or evil on purpose. People are all just kind of reacting, and then one day people start to wake up from a life that was just a series of reactions and counter-reactions. Someone starts to wake up. And then it's a slow unwinding of all these reactions and the ability to be in life in a clear and pure way that is not based on reactivity. And as you start that journey, it is helpful to come to the understanding over time that everyone who ever did anything to you was just reacting to something else that someone did to them or that happened. And there is not really truly, there's not these great intentions of evil. They don't really exist in most people.
And so what I'm hearing that is like there's this generational kind of or this like lineage, this way of parenting that's passed on.
The family curse.
Yeah, without even knowing it's a curse, right? A lot of the time, but knowing it's there and it's. Yeah, I think that's this kind of. In what you were saying, Torben, it just kind of really spoke to me of forgiveness.
Yeah.
Like if we're able to see that our parents most likely were doing what they're doing because they thought it was good.
Mm.
If they were doing it maybe because their parents did it, whatever else, and all these kind of reactions or responses that have happened in our past, if we're able to see see the person and kind of like at least kind of acknowledge that they probably did it for a good cause to some degree in that moment, right? Then we're also able to begin to let go, begin to forgive, and in that forgiveness, in that space of letting go, there becomes an opening, a freedom, or a sense of like the shoulders kind of like dropping away and the weight falling off the back of you, and this kind of like open channel, this open love between you and that person, or you and that part of yourself, or which we can carry around for so many years and not even know, but we can feel it heavy when we're with that person. And it's a lot to kind of sit with this thing of forgiveness, right? Especially if somebody has done something what you consider to be really bad.
Yeah.
Something that is kind of shaped the way you are today. Or they've drilled some kind of behavior into you, or whatever it is. And at the same time, forgiveness is what can really set you free.
There are horrible things. There are things that are just horrible. You can't even say that they were done for a good reason.
No. But even that can be forgiven. At least that's what I believe. It's and maybe that's a little bit kind of like seeing the good in everyone or everything, I guess. Not even seeing the good, but just seeing that like the light in people. Yeah.
If everyone did bad things in the past, and then someone did something bad to someone else, and then it was that other person's right to do something bad back, right? Then if we look through history, it just means pain keeps expanding. whatever it started, it keeps expanding. The sin goes deeper and deeper because someone does something bad to someone else, they have a right to do something back, but then they can do something back again. It's reactions, right? And so what we have to look at is history is actually a story of reactivity, which will continuously create more reactivity. And the trauma will create more trauma because it's passed on for generations, which means the density of pain will only become higher.
Until we break it.
So if you're waking up right now, it stands to you to purify this history of pain. No one else can do it. If you're waking up, that means for a brief moment there is a person who is not just reacting. So we're trying to purify the energy of this world. We're trying to purify the history of pain. We're trying to give up our right to take revenge. We're trying to give up our right to pass judgment.
To resent.
It doesn't mean you can't stay away from hurtful people. You still have to do that. But if everyone uses their right to hit back, it doesn't end ever. It never ends. So someone at some point has to give up what happened to them.
Just as you're sharing this here, Torben, I can't help but like kind of be filled with this like part of that letting go, part of that giving up. Not necessarily giving up, but like letting go of reacting, or letting go of that generational trauma or that pain. Is like kind of shining a light on it. And the part is like, you kind of waking up, your spiritual lightness waking up, and in that spiritual lightness, just like a torch kind of focusing on that trauma, it's kind of like burning it. It's the light that is, that spiritual light that is kind of the way it can burn the trauma and burn the cycle of it repeating itself, going around and around.
Yeah. And
I really kind of see that right now in this moment, and just kind of feel this energy, this lightness of, and just kind of just like, whoa, like, of course, like the more spiritual we are, the more we're able to know thyself, but to kind of come from our authentic self and live from that place within us, and to come from, to be from that lightness, that love, and when you come from that place, it's like, of course the generational trauma is going to break that cycle. It's going to stop. Wow, this is the way, the spiritual way. Any final thoughts, Torben? Man, I'm so happy we're having this conversation and that you're listening in.
It's my great wish that, and I have been moving towards this for a long time in my life. I've been moving towards this with people who have heard me and who I've heard, and we both wish to move into a world where we can get past what happened and what we did to each other, and then focus on what do we want to do now? What are we here to do? Free of the past, free of reactivity. What do you actually want to do with this life, with this moment, with these people who are around you, who hopefully you've chosen who you want in your life? Getting past what happened to us and what we did and what they did to us, what do you want to do now? That's the beautiful way to live, and that's how the new age is brought in, is purifying your energy and saying, what do I want to do now? What do I want to do with what I have?
And that choice is yours and ours to make. What a beautiful note to finish this conversation on, Caravan. Thank you for this.
Thank you.
It's very spiritual energy, this very kind of nourishing, and this wholefulness in this kind of conversation. I really feel grateful.
Me too.
Yeah.
We'll see you on the trail.
See you on the trail.